I was sitting in my daughter's living room, recording voice samples so they could preserve my memories forever. My neighbor Diana was there, supposedly to help with the technical setup. When Vanessa and Derek stepped out to take a phone call, Diana leaned close and whispered, "Mrs. Chen, I need you to check your bank accounts right now. Don't let them know I told you." My hand shook as I opened my banking app. In the last 3 months, $47,000 had been transferred out of my savings. Every single transaction was authorized by voice verification. My voice. But I had never made those calls. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 68 years old, I thought I understood how the world worked. I had been a music teacher for 40 years, raised 2 daughters as a single mother after my husband Richard died of cancer, when the girls were still in elementary school, and managed to build a comfortable retirement through careful saving and smart investments. I lived in a modest but beautiful townhouse in Portland, Oregon, surrounded by the piano students I still taught part-time, and the garden I had cultivated for decades. My life was peaceful, predictable, and exactly what I had worked so hard to achieve. My daughter Vanessa was 39 years old, married to Derek Thornton for 8 years, and they had 2 children I adored. Vanessa had always been ambitious, working her way up to a senior position at a marketing firm downtown, while Derek ran his own consulting business that he claimed was doing well, though he was always vague about the details. They lived in a large house in the West Hills neighborhood, the kind of place that screamed success and careful image management. My other daughter, Lauren, lived in Seattle with her husband and 3 kids, working as a nurse and living a life that seemed more grounded, more real somehow. It was Vanessa who first approached me about the voice preservation project. She called me one evening in late April, her voice warm with what I thought was genuine affection. "Mom, Derek and I have been talking, and we want to do something really special for the kids. We want to preserve your voice before anything happens. Record you reading stories, singing songs, sharing family history. That way, even when you're not around anymore, the grandkids will always have you." The way she phrased it, "when you're not around anymore," should have struck me as odd. I was 68 and in excellent health. I taught piano 4 days a week, worked in my garden, and had more energy than some people half my age. But I chalked it up to Vanessa's tendency toward melodrama, and her obsession with capturing every moment for posterity. She had always been the one taking photos at family gatherings, insisting on documenting everything for future generations. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, touched by what seemed like thoughtfulness. "That sounds like a wonderful idea." When Vanessa and Derek arrived the following Saturday with professional recording equipment, I was genuinely excited. They set up microphones in my living room, hung sound-dampening panels on the walls, and Derek explained that they wanted to capture the highest quality audio possible. He worked in tech consulting after all, so I trusted that he knew what he was doing. "We're going to use some really advanced AI technology," Derek explained, adjusting the microphone stand to the perfect height. "It's not just about recording your voice. We're creating a complete vocal model that can reproduce your exact tone, cadence, pronunciation, everything. It's like creating a digital version of you that can say anything, even things you never actually recorded." "That sounds almost like science fiction," I said with a laugh. "Like I'm creating a robot version of myself." Derek smiled that charming smile he always used when he wanted something. "It's not quite that dramatic, but the technology is incredible. We'll need several hours of recordings to get enough data. Different emotions, different speeds of speech, various contexts. The more variety we capture, the more realistic the AI model will be." Over the next 3 weeks, I spent hours recording for them. I read children's books and classic literature. I sang lullabies and folk songs from my childhood. I told stories about my parents, about Richard, about raising Vanessa and Lauren. I spoke in different emotional tones, happy memories that made me laugh, sad stories that brought tears to my eyes, even angry recollections of injustices I had witnessed. Derek said the emotional range was crucial for creating an authentic model. My neighbor Diana Patel had been watching these recording sessions with increasing concern. Diana was 52, a software engineer who worked from home and had become a good friend over the 5 years she had lived next door. She was sharp, observant, and had a natural skepticism about technology that came from understanding it too well. After the 3rd recording session, she knocked on my door with a container of homemade samosas, and an expression that suggested this was more than a social call. "Margaret," she said carefully as we sat in my kitchen, "I don't want to overstep, but I'm a little concerned about this voice recording project. Have Vanessa and Derek explained exactly what they're planning to do with the AI model they're creating? I mean, beyond just having it read stories to the grandkids." I thought about it and realized they hadn't really explained the details. "It's for the children," I said, "so they can hear my voice even after I'm gone. They're creating some kind of digital archive." Diana stirred her tea slowly, choosing her words carefully. "The technology they're describing is called voice cloning or voice synthesis. It's incredibly powerful, and yes, it can be used for preserving memories, but it can also be used for other things that might not be in your best interest." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a flutter of anxiety in my chest. With a high-quality voice model, someone could potentially make it sound like you're saying anything they want. They could create audio of you authorizing transactions, giving permissions, making statements you never actually made. Banks and financial institutions are starting to use voice verification for security, but the technology hasn't caught up with how good AI voice cloning has become. I laughed, trying to dismiss the concern. "Diana, I appreciate your worry, but Vanessa is my daughter. She wouldn't do anything to harm me. This is a family project, a gift for my grandchildren." Diana nodded but didn't look convinced. "I'm sure you're right. I just think it's important to be aware of what the technology can do. Maybe ask them some questions about how they're securing the voice model, who has access to it, that kind of thing. Just to be safe." I promised I would, but honestly I thought Diana was being paranoid. This was my daughter, my own flesh and blood. The idea that Vanessa would use something as innocent as preserving my voice for malicious purposes seemed absurd. The recording sessions concluded in mid-May, and Derek said they had everything they needed to create the AI model. It would take a few weeks to process all the audio and train the system, but he promised the results would be amazing. Vanessa called frequently during this time, checking in on me, asking about my health, inquiring about my daily routine with a level of detail that seemed excessive even for her usually attentive nature. "How are you feeling, Mom?" she would ask. "Any doctor's appointments coming up? Are you planning any trips? Have you been sleeping well?" The questions felt intrusive, but I attributed it to her caring nature. She had always been my more devoted daughter, the one who called regularly and insisted on family dinners and holiday celebrations. Lauren was loving but independent, often too busy with her nursing shifts and her own children to maintain constant contact. Vanessa filled that gap, or so I thought. It was Diana who first noticed something was wrong. She worked from home and had a clear view of my driveway from her home office window. One morning in early June, she saw Vanessa and Derek arrive at my house when I wasn't home. I had mentioned to Diana that I was going to a doctor's appointment, just a routine checkup, so there was no reason for them to be there. Diana watched as they let themselves in with a key I had given Vanessa years ago for emergencies. They were inside for almost an hour. When I returned home, everything looked normal. Nothing was out of place, nothing was missing. But Diana came over that evening with a troubled expression. "Margaret, I saw Vanessa and Derek at your house today while you were out. Did they mention they were stopping by?" I shook my head, confused. "No, they didn't say anything. Maybe they were dropping something off for me? A gift or something." They were carrying laptops and what looked like external hard drives when they went in. When they left, they were having an intense conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but Derek looked angry and Vanessa seemed stressed. "I just thought you should know." A small warning bell went off in my mind, but I pushed it aside. They probably needed to access something, or maybe they were setting up some kind of surprise for me. I was probably being too trusting, but the alternative, that my daughter was doing something behind my back, seemed impossible to accept. Then, about 2 weeks later, I received a notification from my bank. It was a security alert about a large transfer from my savings account. I immediately logged into my online banking, my heart starting to race. $25,000 had been transferred from my savings to an account I didn't recognize. The transaction notes indicated it had been authorized by voice verification. My voice verification. I called the bank immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "There must be some mistake," I told the customer service representative. "I never authorized this transfer. I don't even recognize the account it went to." The representative pulled up my account and reviewed the transaction. "Mrs. Chen, according to our records, You called our voice verification line at 2:15 p.m. yesterday and authorized this transfer. The voice print matched your registered profile perfectly. All security questions were answered correctly. But I didn't call you yesterday afternoon, I insisted. I was teaching piano lessons from 1 to 4. I have students who can verify that. I never made that call. The representative's tone became more formal, more cautious. Mrs. Chen, I understand your concern, but our voice verification system is very sophisticated. It doesn't just recognize voices, it analyzes dozens of unique vocal characteristics that are nearly impossible to fake. Are you certain you didn't make this call? Perhaps you forgot. Or perhaps someone was helping you with the transaction. I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. The voice recording sessions. The AI model. Derek's explanation about how it could reproduce my voice saying anything.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Diana's warnings about what the technology could be used for. No, I said quietly. I didn't forget. I never made that call. But I think I know who did. After I hung up with the bank, I sat in my living room trying to process what was happening. My own daughter, the child I had raised and sacrificed for, had used technology to steal from me. Not just steal, but use my own voice as the weapon. The betrayal felt worse than the financial loss. I called Diana, and she was at my door within minutes. When I explained what had happened, her face went pale. Margaret, this is serious. This isn't just theft. It's identity fraud using some very sophisticated technology. We need to document everything and we need to do it carefully. If Vanessa and Derek are willing to do this once, they'll do it again. Diana's background in software engineering made her the perfect ally in this situation. She understood both the technical aspects of what had been done to me and the evidence we would need to prove it. She helped me file a fraud report with the bank, but the process was frustrating. The bank's fraud department was skeptical that someone could fake my voice well enough to fool their verification system. They suggested that perhaps I had authorized the transfer and forgotten about it, or that maybe I had been confused when I made the call. The implication that I was an elderly woman who couldn't remember her own actions was insulting and infuriating. Diana then helped me set up monitoring on all my accounts and change all my passwords and security questions. But the voice verification was the weak point. How do you change your voice? How do you protect yourself when someone has created a perfect digital copy of you? We need to prove that they have the AI voice model and that they've been using it, Diana said. That means we need to catch them in the act or find evidence of what they've done. Over the next few days, I reviewed my bank statements carefully, going back 3 months to when the voice recording sessions had begun. What I found made me sick. There had been 7 transfers total, ranging from $3,000 to $25,000. $47,000, taken from my accounts using my own voice, while I had no idea it was happening. The transfers had been spread out strategically, never so frequent that they would trigger automatic alerts, never so large that they would require additional verification beyond the voice authorization. Diana helped me create a spreadsheet documenting every fraudulent transaction, the dates, the amounts, the receiving accounts. We cross-referenced the dates with my calendar and found that every single transfer had occurred when I had a documented alibi. Teaching lessons, at doctor's appointments, having lunch with friends. Someone who knew my schedule had been making these calls during times when I definitely couldn't have made them myself. But we still needed more proof. The bank was treating this as a case of possible confusion rather than fraud. The police would need evidence that Vanessa and Derek had the capability to clone my voice and had actually done so. That's when Diana came up with a plan that was risky, but might give us the evidence we needed. What if we set up a situation where they think they can make another transfer? Diana suggested. But this time we're watching and recording everything. If we can catch them making the call using the clone voice, we'll have proof that can't be disputed. It felt like something from a detective movie, but I was desperate. My own daughter was stealing from me using technology one barely understood, and I needed to stop her before she took everything I had worked for. Diana installed discrete security cameras in my home, hidden in picture frames and bookshelves. She set up audio recording equipment that would capture any conversations. We were turning my house into a surveillance operation, and I hated every moment of it. But I hated the betrayal more. I called Vanessa and casually mentioned that I was planning to make a large investment and would be moving $50,000 from my savings to a new account. I made sure to say this while Diana was recording the call. If they took the bait, they would try to intercept that transfer and redirect the money to themselves. 2 days later, Diana was monitoring my accounts from her house when she saw a pending transaction. $50,000 being transferred from my savings to an unfamiliar account. She immediately called me. They took the bait, Margaret. The transfer is processing right now. And according to the timestamp, the authorization call was made 15 minutes ago. Where are you right now? I'm at the grocery store, I said, my voice shaking. I have the receipt timestamp to prove it. Diana, they're doing it right now, while I'm standing in the produce section holding a bag of apples. I can't have made that call. Get home as fast as you can, Diana said. I'm calling the police and the bank. We have them. When I arrived home, there were already 2 police officers in my driveway. Diana had explained the situation, and they were taking it seriously, especially once she showed them the documented pattern of fraudulent transfers and the timing that proved I couldn't have made the authorization calls. But the real evidence came from the phone records. Diana had used her technical skills to trace the authorization calls made to the bank. They hadn't come from my phone number, but from a spoofed number that appeared to be mine. The actual calls had originated from a phone registered to Derek Thornton. He had been in his car, parked 2 blocks from his office, making calls to my bank using an AI-generated version of my voice, authorizing transfers I never approved, stealing my retirement savings while I shopped for groceries and taught piano to children. The police obtained a warrant to search Vanessa and Derek's house and seized their computers and phones. What they found was damning. The complete AI voice model Derek had created from my recordings. Software programs designed specifically for voice cloning. Detailed spreadsheets showing my account balances, my daily schedule, planned transfer amounts and dates. Email conversations between Vanessa and Derek discussing how much they could take before I would notice. Text messages where they joked about how easy it was to fool the bank's security system. There were also conversations about their financial situation. And that's when the motive became clear. Derek's consulting business was failing. He had massive debts from bad investments and was facing potential bankruptcy. Vanessa was terrified of losing their house, their lifestyle, their social status. They had looked at my comfortable retirement savings and seen a solution to their problems. The voice preservation project had never been about family memories or gifts for the grandchildren. It had been a calculated plan to gain access to my money using technology that most people, including me, didn't understand well enough to question. Diana had saved me, just as Rosa had saved Evelyn in that other story I would hear about years later. But whereas Rosa had been an employee who risked her job, Diana was a friend who risked our friendship by being suspicious of my family. She had seen what I couldn't bear to see, that sometimes the people who claim to love us are the ones willing to hurt us most deeply. As I sat in my living room that evening, with police officers documenting evidence and Diana sitting beside me holding my hand, I realized that my life had just changed forever. My daughter had tried to steal my future, and she had used my own voice to do it. The forensic analysis of Derek's computers revealed a level of planning that went far beyond what I had initially imagined. Detective James Rodriguez, the lead investigator assigned to my case, sat across from me in my living room 3 days after the arrests and walked me through what they had found. Diana sat beside me, her hand resting protectively on my arm, as if she could shield me from the words that were about to shatter whatever remained of my illusions about my daughter. Mrs. Chen, Detective Rodriguez began, his voice gentle but firm, we've recovered extensive evidence from the devices we seized. This wasn't a spontaneous crime or an opportunistic theft. This was a sophisticated, long-term fraud operation that your daughter and son-in-law had been planning for at least 8 months before they even approached you about the voice recording project. 8 months. I tried to process that timeline. 8 months meant they had been planning this before Christmas, before Vanessa's birthday dinner where she had cried telling me how much she loved me, before the family vacation we had taken together where Derek had insisted on paying for my hotel room as a generous gesture. Every kind word, every thoughtful action during that time had been part of a performance designed to keep me trusting and vulnerable. Detective Rodriguez opened his laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a document titled Voice Cloning Project Timeline. It was dated October of the previous year, A full 6 months before Vanessa had called me with the supposedly spontaneous idea of preserving my voice. The document outlined everything. Research into AI voice cloning technology. Selection of the best software for the project. A detailed script of how to approach me with the idea in a way that would seem loving and family-oriented rather than suspicious. Even notes on which emotional stories they should ask me to tell during recording sessions to capture the full range of my vocal expressions. They researched your banking habits, Detective Rodriguez continued, clicking to another document. They documented which banks you used, what type of security measures each one had, whether they used voice verification for transactions. They specifically chose to create the AI voice model because they knew your primary bank had recently implemented voice biometrics as a security feature. They saw it as an opportunity, not an obstacle. Diana leaned forward, her software engineering background making her ask the technical questions I couldn't formulate. What kind of voice cloning software did they use? How sophisticated was the model they created? Detective Rodriguez pulled up another file. They used a program called VoiceForge Pro. It's commercial software, actually designed for legitimate purposes like creating audiobooks or accessibility tools for people who have lost their ability to speak. But like any technology, it can be misused. The model they created from your recordings was extremely high quality. Our forensic audio analyst said it would fool most people who know you, and it definitely fooled the bank's verification system. He played an audio clip, and I heard my own voice saying words I had never spoken. This is Margaret Chen, and I would like to authorize a transfer of $15,000 from my savings account ending in 7429 to account number 68394172. The confirmation code is Blue 7 Delta 9. I authorized this transaction. It was perfect. The tone, the cadence, the slight way I pronounced certain vowels. It was indistinguishable from my actual voice. If someone had played that for me without context, I would have sworn I had said those words. They generated dozens of these authorization scripts, Detective Rodriguez explained. They had templates for different transaction types and amounts. They could make it sound like you were authorizing anything they wanted. The detective pulled up a spreadsheet that made my stomach turn. It showed every fraudulent transaction they had made over the past 6 months, but it also showed planned future transactions. They had been slowly escalating the amounts, testing what they could get away with before I noticed or before the bank flagged the activity as suspicious. According to this planning document, they were building up to a final series of large transfers that would have emptied your accounts completely. They called it the exit strategy. The plan was to take everything over a period of about 2 weeks, then claim that you had made the transfers yourself but were experiencing cognitive decline and didn't remember doing it. They had already started laying the groundwork for that narrative. What do you mean? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Detective Rodriguez pulled up a series of emails between Vanessa and Derek. In these messages, they discuss making comments to other family members about being worried about your memory, suggesting that you seemed confused sometimes, mentioning that you had repeated stories or forgotten conversations. They were creating a false narrative of cognitive decline so that when they emptied your accounts, they could claim you had done it yourself during periods of confusion. I felt Diana's grip on my arm tighten. That's why Vanessa kept asking about your doctor's appointments and your health, Diana said quietly. She was trying to find anything she could use to support a claim that you weren't mentally competent. I remembered those phone calls, Vanessa's excessive concern about every minor health issue, her suggestion that maybe I should see a neurologist just to be safe, her comments to my other daughter Lauren about how I seemed to be slowing down. It hadn't been concern. It had been groundwork for a story that would destroy my reputation and my autonomy, while they stole everything I had. There's more, Detective Rodriguez said, and his tone suggested this would be worse than what he had already shown me. We found audio recordings on Derek's phone. Not the AI-generated ones, but actual recordings of conversations between him and Vanessa. Recordings where they discuss the fraud, mock you, and talk about their plans. I need to warn you that these are difficult to listen to, but they're crucial evidence for the prosecution's case. He hesitated, giving me a chance to refuse, but I needed to hear it. I needed to understand who my daughter really was. Play them, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The first recording started, and I immediately recognized the sound of Vanessa's kitchen. I could hear dishes clanking in the background, the sound of their espresso machine that Derek was so proud of. Then I heard my daughter's voice, casual and cold in a way I had never heard before. I swear, dealing with my mother is exhausting, Vanessa said. She's so trusting it's almost pathetic. Today she actually thanked me for caring so much about preserving her voice. Like she has no idea we're creating a tool to rob her blind. Derek's laugh came through clearly. The voice model is nearly perfect. I tested it on that small banking chatbot and it passed every verification check. Your mom's vocal patterns are pretty simple to replicate. She doesn't have any unusual speech characteristics that would be hard for the AI to reproduce. Simple. My voice, which I had trained for decades as a music teacher, which I had used to teach hundreds of students, which carried the story of my entire life, was simple to them. Just data to be exploited. How much do you think we can get before she notices? Vanessa asked. I heard the sound of Derek typing. Based on her account balances and her spending patterns, I think we can safely take about $10,000 a month for the first few months. She doesn't check her statements that carefully. Then we can accelerate. The mortgage payment is killing us, and if we don't get ahead of these credit card bills, we're going to lose the house. So we're definitely going for the full amount eventually? Vanessa's voice had an edge to it, something between anxiety and excitement. Absolutely, Derek replied. We've put too much work into this to do it halfway. Once we have the voice model perfected and we've established a pattern of successful small transfers, we'll move to phase 2. Empty everything, claim she did it during a period of confusion, maybe even suggest she was trying to hide money because she's getting paranoid in her old age. By the time anyone sorts it out, the money will be long gone and untraceable. The recording ended, and the room was silent except for my ragged breathing. Diana was crying quietly beside me, and Detective Rodriguez looked like he had seen this kind of cruelty too many times, but it still made him angry. There are 6 more recordings like this, he said. All of them captured by Derek himself. We think he was recording their planning sessions as insurance, in case things went wrong and he needed leverage against Vanessa. It's common in conspiracies between partners. Neither one fully trusts the other. Do I have to hear all of them? I asked, and Detective Rodriguez shook his head. Not right now. But I need you to know what's in them because the prosecution will use them at trial. They discuss specific transaction amounts and dates. They talk about forging your signature on documents. They mention creating a fraudulent power of attorney, so they could access your accounts, even without the voice verification. They laugh about how you believe the Voice Preservation Project was a loving family gesture. And in the most recent recording, made just 2 days before we arrested them, they discuss whether they should start giving you medication that would actually cause cognitive impairment to make their story more believable. I felt like I might be sick. They were going to poison me, I said. Not to kill me, but to make me confused enough that no one would believe me when I said I hadn't authorized the transfers. That was under discussion, Detective Rodriguez confirmed. We found internet search history on Derek's computer for medications that cause memory problems and confusion. Prescriptions for elderly patients that could be obtained or forged. They hadn't acted on it yet, but they were researching the option. Diana's voice was shaking with rage. This is so much worse than just financial fraud. They were planning to gaslight Margaret into thinking she was losing her mind. They were going to destroy her reputation, her autonomy, her relationships with everyone who cares about her. Also, they could steal money to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. Detective Rodriguez nodded. That's exactly what makes this case particularly serious. This isn't just theft. It's identity fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potentially attempted criminal impairment. The district attorney is taking this very seriously. Your daughter and her husband are facing significant prison time if convicted. How much time? I asked. For all the charges combined, Vanessa is looking at 10 to 15 years. Derek, as the primary architect of the technical aspects and the one who actually made the fraudulent calls, is looking at 15 to 20 years. Those are the maximum sentences, of course. What they actually receive will depend on whether they accept plea deals, show remorse, and how the trial proceeds. Over the next few weeks, more evidence emerged that painted an even darker picture of my daughter's character. Diana helped me work with the bank's fraud investigation team to trace where the stolen money had gone. Some had been used to pay off credit card debt that Vanessa and Derek had accumulated through overspending on their lifestyle. More had gone to cover their mortgage payments. A significant amount had been spent on luxury items, vacations, and expensive dinners at restaurants I could never afford. They had stolen from me to maintain appearances. to keep up with their wealthy neighbors, to post photos on social media of their perfect life while I worried about my declining bank balance and cut back on my own spending to make sure I had enough for retirement. The forensic accountant assigned to the case discovered that Derek's consulting business was essentially a facade. He had a few clients but not enough to support their lifestyle. He had been borrowing money from friends and family, taking out personal loans, and accumulating debt at an alarming rate. When those sources dried up, they had turned to me. "Your mother is like a personal ATM," Derek had said in one of the recordings. "She has all this money just sitting there not doing anything. She lives in that little townhouse and drives that old car and acts like she needs to save every penny. Meanwhile, we're drowning, and she could solve all our problems without even noticing the money was gone." The entitlement in his voice was breathtaking. My retirement savings, earned through decades of careful work and frugal living, was just sitting there in his estimation, not supporting my future security, not providing peace of mind after a lifetime of hard work, just wasted money that they deserved more than I did. Vanessa's response in that recording was even worse. "She's always been so careful with money. It's annoying. When Dad died, she got the life insurance in the house, and she acts like she built everything herself. She could have helped us years ago, but she's too concerned about teaching us responsibility. Well, maybe this will teach her that hoarding money doesn't keep you safe. Just makes you a target." That word target echoed in my mind for days. I wasn't her mother in that moment. I was a target, something to be exploited and used. The person who had sacrificed to give her a good education, who had worked extra jobs to pay for her college, who had helped with her wedding expenses and given her the down payment assistance for her first house, was now just an obstacle to the lifestyle she felt entitled to. Detective Rodriguez arranged for me to meet with the district attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Morales who had prosecuted numerous fraud cases. She sat across from me in her office, surrounded by case files and legal books, and explained what the trial process would look like. "Mrs. Chen," she began, "we have an exceptionally strong case. The evidence is overwhelming, both technical and testimonial. The AI voice model, the fraudulent transactions, the planning documents, the recordings of them discussing the fraud, everything points to a clear pattern of calculated criminal behavior. However, I need to prepare you for what the defense will likely argue." "What will they say?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "They'll try to minimize Vanessa's role and place most of the blame on Derek. They'll argue that he was the technical expert, that he created the voice cloning system, that he made the actual calls to the bank. They'll paint Vanessa as someone who was influenced or coerced by her husband, who maybe knew what was happening but wasn't the primary actor. It's a common defense strategy in conspiracy cases involving married couples." "But that's not true," I said. "The recordings show Vanessa was fully involved in the planning. She was enthusiastic about the fraud. She mocked me just as much as Derek did." Catherine nodded. "I know, and we'll present all of that evidence. But defense attorneys are skilled at creating doubt and sympathy. They may also argue that Vanessa was under financial pressure, that she was trying to save her family from bankruptcy, that her actions were desperate rather than malicious. They might even suggest that she intended to pay the money back eventually, which is absurd given the evidence, but juries sometimes want to believe that family members aren't truly capable of this level of betrayal." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after the arrests. Both Vanessa and Derek had been released on bail, which troubled me, though Detective Rodriguez assured me they had been ordered to have no contact with me and were being electronically monitored. I had obtained a restraining order against both of them, but the knowledge that they were out there, free to continue their lives while my world had been shattered, felt wrong. Diana had moved into my guest room during this time, refusing to leave me alone. She's my friend and my protection, creating a buffer between me and the world while I tried to process the betrayal. She screened my phone calls, dealt with the reporters who had started calling after the story leaked to the media, and sat with me during the long nights when I couldn't sleep because my mind kept replaying every interaction with Vanessa, looking for signs I should have seen. My other daughter Lauren drove down from Seattle as soon as she heard what happened. She arrived with her husband and stayed for a week, and I watched her struggle to understand how her sister could have done this. "Mom, I don't understand," Lauren said one evening as we sat in my living room. "Vanessa always seemed to care about you. She called you all the time, planned family events, insisted on holiday celebrations. How could she do all of that while planning to rob you?" It was all performance, I said quietly. Every call, every visit, every expression of love was calculated to keep me trusting her. She needed me to believe she cared so I would never suspect what she was really doing. Lauren wiped away tears. I keep thinking about all the time she criticized me for not calling you enough, for being too busy with work and my kids to visit more often. She acted like she was the devoted daughter and I was the neglectful one. But she was just keeping you isolated and dependent on her so she could control the narrative around you. Diana, who had been making tea in the kitchen, brought it out and joined our conversation. That's exactly what financial abusers do. They isolate their victims from other support systems. They become the primary point of contact so they can control information flow. If Vanessa was your main connection to the family, she could tell other people you were doing fine even while she was robbing you blind. Lauren looked at Diana with gratitude. Thank you for seeing what I missed. Thank you for being suspicious when the rest of us just accepted Vanessa's version of reality. Diana shook her head. I only saw it because I understand the technology. Most people would have thought the voice preservation project sounded loving and thoughtful. It's brilliant in its cruelty, actually. Using something that sounds like a gift to create a weapon. The preliminary hearing was my first time seeing Vanessa since her arrest. She walked into the courtroom wearing a conservative navy suit, her hair styled carefully, looking every inch the successful professional rather than an accused criminal. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she looked away quickly, but not before I saw something in her expression that might have been shame or might have been anger that she had been caught. Derek sat beside her at the defense table, and his attorney was a man named Richard Blackstone, who had a reputation for defending white-collar criminals. Vanessa's attorney was Patricia Whitmore, a woman who specialized in creating sympathy for defendants by emphasizing their personal circumstances. The hearing was mostly procedural, establishing that there was sufficient evidence to move forward with a trial. But both defense attorneys made statements that gave me insight into their strategy. My client, Patricia Whitmore said, referring to Vanessa, is a devoted mother and daughter who found herself in an impossible financial situation. While we acknowledge that mistakes were made, the evidence will show that Ms. Chen Thornton was not the architect of this scheme, but rather someone who was influenced by her husband's technical expertise and reassurances that what they were doing was somehow justified. I felt Diana tense beside me in the courtroom gallery. Influenced. As if Vanessa had been some passive participant instead of an enthusiastic partner in my victimization. Richard Blackstone, Derek's attorney, took a different approach. My client is a successful entrepreneur who made serious errors in judgment during a period of extreme financial stress. However, the prosecution's characterization of this as a calculated, malicious fraud scheme is overblown. Mr. Thornton believed that family resources should be available to help family members in need, and while his methods were inappropriate, his intent was not to permanently deprive Mrs. Chen of her assets. Catherine Morales stood up, her expression showing barely controlled anger. Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows this was not a matter of borrowing family resources or errors in judgment. The defendants created sophisticated technology to impersonate the victim. They made multiple fraudulent transactions over a 6-month period. They discussed plans to empty her accounts entirely and to medicate her to cause actual cognitive impairment that would prevent her from defending herself. This was systematic elder abuse and fraud, and the defendants showed no remorse or intention to stop until they were caught. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Patricia Morrison, looked over her glasses at both defense attorneys. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence, and I find sufficient cause to bind both defendants over for trial on all charges. Trial is set to begin in 3 months. Both defendants will remain on bail with electronic monitoring and no contact orders. She paused, looking directly at Vanessa and Derek. I want to be clear that the evidence I've reviewed so far is deeply troubling. This court takes elder abuse very seriously. Both defendants would be wise to consider seriously any plea offers that may be extended by the prosecution. As we left the courtroom, a reporter approached me asking for a comment. Diana stepped between us smoothly. Mrs. Chen has no statement at this time. Please respect her privacy during this difficult process. But as we walked to Diana's car, I saw Vanessa and Derek leaving through a side entrance. Derek was on his phone looking angry. Vanessa was crying, and for just a moment, I felt a flash of the maternal instinct that had defined so much of my life. My daughter was in pain, and part of me wanted to comfort her. Then I remembered that her tears were for herself, for being caught, for facing consequences. They weren't for what she had done to me. That realization helped me harden my heart in a way I had never thought I would need to with my own child. The next 3 months were a blur of preparation for trial. I met with Catherine Morales and her team multiple times, going over every detail of the case. They prepared me for testimony, warning me that the defense would try to paint me as confused or vindictive, or somehow responsible for my daughter's actions through my parenting or my financial choices. You need to be prepared for them to attack your character, Catherine warned. They'll suggest you were neglectful, that you favored one daughter over the other, that you were stingy with money when Vanessa needed help. None of it is relevant to whether she committed fraud, but they'll try to create sympathy for her by making you look unsympathetic. I also spent time with a therapist specializing in family trauma and betrayal. Dr. Sarah Kim helped me process the layers of grief I was experiencing. You're not just grieving the loss of your daughter, she explained during one of our sessions. You're grieving the loss of the person you thought she was. You're grieving the relationship you believed you had. You're grieving your own naivety and trust. And you're grieving the future you imagine with your daughter and grandchildren. That's a lot of loss to process all at once. The grandchildren were perhaps the hardest part. Vanessa's children, Emma and Jacob, were 10 and 7 years old. They had no idea why they suddenly couldn't see their grandmother, why family gatherings had stopped, why there was tension and whispered conversations. Whenever adults talked, Lauren had tried to explain in age-appropriate terms that their mother had made some bad choices and was in trouble, but the children couldn't understand why that meant they couldn't see me. I wanted to see them desperately. But my attorney had advised against any contact with anyone in Vanessa's immediate family until after the trial. The defense might try to use any contact as evidence that I wasn't really traumatized or that I had forgiven the crime. So I missed Emma's school play and Jacob's birthday party, adding more loss to the pile I was already carrying. Diana continued to be my anchor during this time. She had taken a leave of absence from her job to help me navigate the legal process, and to continue documenting the technical aspects of the fraud. She had become something of an expert on AI voice cloning fraud, and was invited to speak at a cybersecurity conference about my case, as an example of emerging threats in identity theft. With my permission, she shared the story without using my name, and the response was overwhelming. Dozens of people reached out saying they had elderly relatives who might be vulnerable to similar schemes. Several reported suspicious activity they hadn't recognized as fraud until hearing Diana's presentation. One evening, about a month before the trial was set to begin, Lauren called with news that hit me like another betrayal. "Mom," she said, her voice tight with anger, "I just found out that Vanessa has been telling people her version of what happened. She's claiming that you're being vindictive because she confronted you about hoarding money that should be helping the family. She's saying Derek was just trying to help manage your finances because you were getting confused, and you misunderstood what was happening and called the police out of spite." I sat down heavily, feeling the weight of this new attack. "She's still trying to manipulate the narrative," I said. "Even facing criminal charges, she's trying to make me the villain." Lauren's voice was shaking. I told her to stop. I told her I had seen the evidence, heard the recordings, read the planning documents. I told her that what she did was unforgivable, and that she needed to accept responsibility instead of trying to destroy your reputation to save herself. Do you know what she said? "What?" I asked, dreading the answer. She said I had always taken your side, that I had always been your favorite, and that's why I couldn't see the truth. She said you had manipulated me just like you manipulated the police and the district attorney. Mom, she's completely rewritten reality in her mind. She genuinely seems to believe her own lies now. That's the power of self-deception, I said quietly. When the truth is too painful to accept, some people create an alternative version of events where they're the victim instead of the perpetrator. It's easier for Vanessa to believe I'm a vindictive, confused old woman than to accept that she's a criminal who betrayed her own mother. 2 weeks before trial, the prosecution received Derek's forensic psychological evaluation. The psychologist had diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder and noted his complete lack of genuine remorse for his actions. During the evaluation, Derek had primarily expressed anger at being caught and frustration that his plan had been so close to succeeding. He showed no empathy for me as his victim and referred to the fraud as a failed business venture rather than a crime against a family member. Vanessa's evaluation was more complex. The psychologist noted that she exhibited traits of both narcissism and dependent personality disorder. She seemed to genuinely believe that her financial problems entitled her to my money, and that my refusal to simply give it to her was a form of maternal rejection. She expressed anger at me for being frugal while she struggled financially, as if my careful saving was somehow an attack on her rather than a personal choice about how to manage my own money. What neither evaluation showed was genuine remorse or understanding of the harm they had caused. Neither Vanessa nor Derek seemed to grasp that they had committed a serious crime, or that their victim was a real person with feelings and rights. They were focused entirely on their own suffering, the inconvenience of being arrested, the unfairness of facing consequences, the damage to their reputation. A week before trial, Catherine Morales called me with unexpected news. Vanessa's attorney has approached us about a plea deal. She's willing to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for testifying against Derek and receiving a lighter sentence. What kind of sentence would she get? I asked. Probably 5 to 7 years instead of 10 to 15. She would have to allocate fully, which means admitting under oath to everything she did and how the fraud was planned and executed. Her testimony would essentially guarantee Derek's conviction on all charges. Do you want me to accept that deal? I asked. Catherine was quiet for a moment. It's not entirely your decision, but your input matters a great deal. The advantage of the plea deal is that it guarantees a conviction and saves you from having to testify at a lengthy trial. The disadvantage is that Vanessa serves less time and might use her testimony to minimize her own role and maximize Derek's guilt, even though the evidence shows they were equal partners. I thought about it for a long time. The idea of Vanessa getting a reduced sentence felt like she was escaping full accountability for what she had done. But the idea of sitting through a trial, of being cross-examined by defense attorneys trying to paint me as a bad mother or a confused old woman, felt exhausting. Finally, I told Catherine my decision. No deal. I want a trial. I want a jury to hear everything they did and see all the evidence. I want Vanessa to face full consequences for her choices. If that means I have to testify and be attacked on the stand, then that's what I'll do. Catherine's voice held respect when she responded. I understand, and I think that's the right choice. The evidence is strong enough that we don't need her testimony to convict Derek. And frankly, the jury needs to understand that this was a partnership between them, not Derek manipulating an innocent wife. The night before the trial began, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room looking at old photo albums, trying to find the moment when Vanessa had changed from the daughter I loved to the person who could plot against me so callously. But I couldn't find it. In every photo, she was smiling, seemingly happy. At her college graduation, at her wedding, holding her newborn children. There was no visible moment of transformation, no clear point where love became greed. Diana found me there around 2 in the morning, tears streaming down my face as I looked at a photo of Vanessa's 8th birthday party. I had made her cake from scratch, shaped like a piano because she had just started lessons. She had hugged me so tightly that day, told me I was the best mom in the world. That little girl, I said to Diana, where did she go? When did she stop being that child who loved me and become someone who could try to destroy me? Diana sat beside me and gently closed the photo album. Maybe she's always been both people. Maybe the capacity for love and the capacity for cruelty can exist in the same person. Or maybe the financial pressure and Derek's influence changed her in ways you couldn't have prevented. Either way, what she did isn't your fault. You were a good mother. You did everything right. She made her own choices. As dawn broke on the morning of the trial, I dressed carefully in a simple blue dress, minimal jewelry, wanting to look like myself rather than performing for the jury. Diana drove me to the courthouse, and Lauren met us there with her husband. Catherine Morales greeted us in the hallway outside the courtroom, her expression confident and determined. Are you ready? She asked. I thought about everything I had lost. The daughter I thought I knew. The trust one had given so freely. The peaceful retirement I had planned. The relationship with my grandchildren. The sense of safety in my own family. But I also thought about what I had gained. The true friend I had found in Diana. The clarity about who deserved my trust. The strength I had discovered in myself. the purpose I would find in helping others avoid what I had experienced. I'm ready, I told Catherine. Let's go make sure justice is served. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, less dramatic than the courtrooms I had seen on television. But the weight of what was about to happen made the space feel enormous. I sat in the front row of the gallery with Diana on one side and Lauren on the other, watching as people filed in. Court officers, attorneys with their briefcases and legal pads, a handful of reporters who had been following the case, and a few people I didn't recognize who must have been interested members of the public drawn by the unusual nature of the crime. Then Vanessa and Derek were brought in, and my breath caught in my throat. They were dressed conservatively, Vanessa in a gray suit that made her look smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Derek wore a dark suit with a blue tie, his expression carefully neutral. They didn't look like criminals. They looked like a professional couple who might be attending a business meeting. That was part of the strategy, of course. Their attorneys wanted the jury to see them as respectable people who had made mistakes, not as predators who had systematically victimized a family member. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and an expression that suggested she had heard every excuse and seen every manipulation tactic in her decades on the bench. She settled into her seat and looked out over the courtroom with sharp, assessing eyes. We're here for the trial of Vanessa Chen Thornton and Derek Thornton, charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Is the prosecution ready? Catherine Morales stood, her posture radiating confidence. The people are ready, Your Honor. Judge Morrison turned to the defense table. Is the defense ready? Both Patricia Whitmore and Richard Blackstone stood and confirmed they were ready. Then Judge Morrison addressed the room. This is a complex case involving emerging technology and serious allegations of family betrayal. I expect all parties to conduct themselves with professionalism and respect. The jury will be brought in, and we'll begin with opening statements. The jury that had been selected over the previous 2 days filed in, 12 people whose faces I had studied during voir dire, trying to read whether they would understand what had been done to me. There were 8 women and 4 men, ranging in age from mid-30s to early 70s. The oldest juror was a woman named Patricia who was 69, just a year older than me, and I found myself hoping she might understand what it felt like to be targeted because of your age and your trust. Catherine Morales approached the jury box for her opening statement, and the room fell silent. Members of the jury, she began, this case is about a betrayal so profound that it challenges our basic assumptions about family relationships. The defendants, Vanessa Chen Thornton and her husband Derek Thornton, planned and executed a sophisticated fraud scheme against Vanessa's own mother, Margaret Chen. They didn't rob her at gunpoint. They didn't break into her house. Instead, they did something far more insidious. They used cutting-edge artificial intelligence technology to steal her voice and her identity, and then they used that stolen identity to rob her of over $127,000. I saw several jurors lean forward, their interest clearly piqued. Catherine continued, describing the voice preservation project that had seemed so loving, the months of careful planning documented in the defendant's own files, the systematic fraud that had drained my accounts while I remained unaware. She explained how AI voice cloning worked, how the technology that should have been used to preserve family memories had instead been weaponized against me. Over the next several days, she told the jury, you will hear testimony from computer forensics experts, banking security professionals, and from Mrs. Chen herself. You will listen to audio recordings where the defendants discuss their crime in their own words. You will see the planning documents they created. And you will hear the AI-generated voice they created. A voice so perfect in its mimicry that it fooled not only the victim but also sophisticated banking security systems. When you have heard all the evidence, we are confident you will find both defendants guilty on all counts. Patricia Whitmore stood for Vanessa's opening statement, and I braced myself for what I knew was coming. Members of the jury, she began, her voice warm and sympathetic. This case is about a family in crisis and the desperate decisions people make when they feel trapped. Vanessa Chen Thornton is not a criminal mastermind. She's a working mother of 2 who found herself drowning in debt, watching her family face potential homelessness, and influenced by a husband with technical skills she didn't fully understand. She made terrible choices, choices she deeply regrets, but those choices came from a place of desperation, not malice. I felt Lauren stiffen beside me. The narrative that Vanessa was just a desperate mother was carefully designed to create sympathy, but it ignored the mockery and contempt in those recorded conversations, the enthusiasm with which she had participated in planning my victimization. The evidence will show, Whitmore continued, that Derek Thornton was the architect of this scheme. He had the technical expertise to create the AI voice model. He made the actual calls to the banks. He pressured Vanessa to participate by threatening their marriage and their children's security. Vanessa knew what was happening was wrong, but she felt powerless to stop it. She's not innocent, but she's also not the monster the prosecution will try to paint her as. Richard Blackstone's opening statement for Derek took a different approach. Members of the jury, he said, his voice confident and somewhat patronizing. This case involves complex family dynamics that the prosecution is trying to oversimplify into a simple story of good versus evil. Derek Thornton is an entrepreneur who struggled financially, yes. He made poor choices about how to handle that financial stress, absolutely. But the prosecution would have you believe this was all about greed and malice when the reality is far more complicated. Derek believed that family wealth should be available to help family members in need, and he struggled to understand why his mother-in-law, who had substantial retirement savings, wouldn't help them when they were facing bankruptcy. His methods were wrong, but his motivation was to save his family, not to hurt Margaret Chen. The narrative that I was somehow obligated to give them my retirement savings, that my refusal to do so justified their fraud, was infuriating. But Catherine had prepared me for this. Defense attorneys often tried to shift blame to victims, suggesting that we had somehow brought the crime upon ourselves through our choices or our character. The first day of testimony began with the technical evidence. The prosecution called Dr. Andrew Martinez, a computer forensics expert who had examined all the devices seized from Vanessa and Derek's home. Dr. Martinez walked the jury through the software found on Derek's computer, explaining how voice cloning technology worked and demonstrating the sophistication of the AI model they had created from my recordings. This is not consumer-grade technology, Dr. Martinez explained. The software package they use costs about $8,000 and requires significant technical skill to operate properly. Mr. Thornton spent months perfecting the voice model, running tests, and refining the output to make sure it would pass banking security verification. This was not a spontaneous crime or a simple mistake. This was the work of someone who understood exactly what he was doing and took great care to do it successfully. Catherine displayed screenshots of Derek's search history on a large monitor visible to the jury. You can see here that Mr. Thornton researched extensively how different banks implement voice biometric security. He visited forums where people discuss vulnerabilities in financial security systems. He downloaded white papers on defeating voice recognition software. He knew he was creating a tool to commit fraud, and he deliberately researched how to make that fraud as successful as possible. The cross-examination by Richard Blackstone tried to minimize this evidence. Isn't it true, Dr. Martinez, that voice cloning technology has many legitimate uses? Legitimate uses like creating voices for people who have lost the ability to speak, or generating audiobooks. Yes, Dr. Martinez agreed. The technology itself is neutral. It's how it's used that determines whether it's legitimate or criminal. And isn't it possible that Mr. Thornton initially intended to create this voice model for legitimate purposes, for the family memory preservation project that was described to Mrs. Chen, and only later decided to misuse it? Dr. Martinez looked skeptical. Based on the timeline in Mr. Thornton's planning documents, he was researching bank security vulnerabilities before he even approached Mrs. Chen about recording her voice. The planning documents explicitly describe creating the voice model for the purpose of authorizing fraudulent transactions. There's no evidence that this was ever intended to be a legitimate family project. The next witness was Jennifer Wallace, a fraud investigator from my bank. She explained how their voice verification system worked and how sophisticated it needed to be to fool it. Our system doesn't just match voices like you might recognize a friend on the phone, she testified. It analyzes over 100 different vocal characteristics including pitch, tone, resonance, speech patterns, and dozens of other factors. The AI-generated voice that Mr. Thornton created passed every one of our security checks. It was technically perfect. Catherine had Ms. Wallace play several of the fraudulent authorization calls for the jury. Each one was chilling to hear, my voice saying words I had never spoken, authorizing transfers I had never approved, providing verification codes I had never received. The jury members looked disturbed, several of them glancing over at the defendants with expressions that suggested their sympathy was eroding. Ms. Wallace also testified about the timing of the calls, how each one had been made during periods when my phone records showed I was provably somewhere else, teaching lessons or attending appointments. Whoever made these calls knew Mrs. Chen's schedule very well, she said. They deliberately chose times when she had alibis, perhaps to support a later claim that she had made the calls but didn't remember them. The cross-examination tried to suggest that maybe I had made the calls myself and forgotten, or that perhaps someone else had accessed my phone and made the calls without Derek's involvement. But Ms. Wallace calmly dismantled those theories with technical evidence about call origination points and device fingerprints that proved the calls had come from Derek's phone. Day 3 of the trial was when the recorded conversations between Vanessa and Derek were played for the jury. Catherine had warned me this would be the hardest day, hearing my daughter's voice mocking me, dismissing my worth, celebrating the success of stealing from me. The courtroom was completely silent as the first recording played, the one where Vanessa called me pathetically trusting and Derek laughed about how simple my voice was to replicate. I watched the jury members' faces as they listened. Several women looked genuinely shocked. One man in the back row actually shook his head in disbelief. The elderly woman, Patricia, had tears in her eyes. The recordings were more damaging than any expert testimony could have been because they showed Vanessa and Derek in their own words, with their own voices, displaying exactly who they were when they thought no one was listening. Each recording was worse than the last. The one where they discussed how much money they could safely steal before I noticed. The one where they laughed about my frugal living, while they planned vacations with my stolen money. The one where Derek said I was like a personal ATM and Vanessa agreed that my retirement savings were just sitting there wasted. But the recording that I think sealed their fate with the jury was the one where they discussed potentially medicating me to cause actual cognitive impairment. When the jury heard Derek researching medications that would make me confused and Vanessa suggesting they might need to make me actually seem senile to support their narrative, several jury members looked physically ill. One woman actually put her hand over her mouth as if she might be sick. Patricia Whitmore tried damage control during cross-examination of the detective, who had recovered the recordings. Isn't it true that people sometimes say things they don't mean when they're stressed or venting frustration? Isn't it possible that my client was just engaging in angry talk rather than serious planning? Detective Rodriguez looked directly at her with barely concealed contempt. With all respect, counselor, these weren't venting sessions. These were planning meetings where specific actions were discussed and then subsequently carried out. When Mr. Thornton says he'll test the voice model on small transactions first, and then we see small transactions occur exactly as discussed, that's not venting. That's conspiracy. When Mrs. Chen Thornton says they should take everything during a 2-week period, and we find planning documents outlining exactly such a strategy, that's not frustrated talk. That's criminal intent. On day 4 it was my turn to testify. Catherine had prepared me extensively, but nothing could fully prepare me for walking to the witness stand, being sworn in, and looking out at the courtroom where my daughter sat watching me with an unreadable expression. Catherine led me through my testimony gently, establishing my background, my relationship with Vanessa, my complete ignorance of their financial problems and their criminal planning. I described the voice recording sessions, how loving and thoughtful they had seemed at the time, how I had trusted completely that this was a family project meant to preserve memories for my grandchildren. Then she asked me to describe the moment I discovered the fraud, and my voice broke as I remembered the shock of seeing those unauthorized transactions, the sick feeling of realization that my own daughter had stolen from me. I talked about checking my bank accounts while standing in the grocery store, about the $47,000 that had disappeared, about Diana's warning, and the police investigation that revealed the true scope of what had been done to me. How did it make you feel, Catherine asked gently, to learn that your daughter had created an AI version of your voice specifically to commit fraud against you? I took a moment to compose myself before answering. It made me feel violated in a way I can't fully articulate. My voice is such a personal thing. I'm a music teacher. I've spent my whole life using my voice to communicate, to teach, to sing, to express love to my family. Learning that Vanessa had turned my voice into a tool to rob me felt like she had taken something essential to my identity and weaponized it against me. And then Catherine asked the question she had warned me about. The one that would be hardest to answer. Mrs. Chen, do you believe your daughter loves you? I looked directly at Vanessa for the first time since entering the courtroom. She was looking down at the defense table, refusing to meet my eyes. I don't know, I said honestly. I used to believe she did. But love doesn't do what she did. Love doesn't mock and betray. Love doesn't plan to destroy someone's mental capacity to cover up a crime. So either she never loved me and just pretended very convincingly for 39 years, or something in her changed so fundamentally that the person she became is someone I don't know at all. Either way, I've lost my daughter. That person I loved or thought I loved doesn't exist anymore. The cross-examination by Patricia Whitmore was as difficult as I had anticipated. She tried to paint me as a cold mother who had refused to help Vanessa when she was struggling financially, suggesting that my frugal lifestyle while Vanessa faced bankruptcy was somehow a form of parental neglect. Mrs. Chen, didn't you know your daughter was having financial difficulties? Whitmore asked, her tone suggesting I had been deliberately ignorant. I knew they were struggling somewhat, I replied. Many families do. But I didn't know the extent of their debt, because they deliberately hid it from me, while maintaining an expensive lifestyle. If Vanessa had come to me honestly and asked for help, we could have had a conversation about what I might be able to do. Instead, she chose to rob me. But you have substantial retirement savings, Whitmore pressed. Over $300,000. Couldn't you have helped your daughter without significant hardship to yourself? I felt my spine stiffen. That money is my retirement security. I'm 68 years old and living on a fixed income. That savings is what allows me to pay for any medical emergencies, to maintain my home, to have security in my old age. It's not Vanessa's money just because she's my daughter and she wants it. She's a grown woman with a college education and a good job. Her financial problems were the result of choices she and her husband made about spending beyond their means. I'm not obligated to fund their lifestyle choices. Whitmore tried another angle. But isn't it true that you've always been very controlling about money? That you raised your daughters with a very strict, frugal mindset that may have contributed to Vanessa's feelings of deprivation? Catherine objected immediately. Relevance, Your Honor. Whether Mrs. Chen is frugal or generous has no bearing on whether the defendants committed fraud. Sustained, Judge Morrison ruled, looking annoyed with Whitmore's line of questioning. Counselor, the victim's money management style is not on trial here. Let's move on. But the damage had been done. Whitmore had planted the idea that maybe I was partly to blame, that my frugality had somehow driven Vanessa to desperate measures. It was a classic defense tactic. Shift focus from the criminal to the victim. Suggest that the crime was somehow provoked or justified by the victim's behavior. Richard Blackstone's cross-examination focused on trying to establish that I had cognitive issues that might explain confusion about the transactions. Mrs. Chen, you're 68 years old. Have you experienced any memory problems? Any confusion about daily activities? Do you ever forget appointments or misplace items? I answered calmly, as Catherine had coached me to do. I have the normal minor memory lapses that anyone my age experiences. But I keep detailed calendars, I manage my own household and finances, I teach piano to students 4 days a week, and I have no diagnosis of any cognitive impairment. My doctor can testify to that if needed. But isn't it possible, Blackstone pressed, that you authorized some of these transactions and simply don't remember doing so? That perhaps you were confused when you made the calls? No, I said firmly. It's not possible because I have documented proof of where I was during every single fraudulent call. I was teaching students with multiple witnesses who can confirm the times. I was at doctor's appointments with check-in records that prove my presence. I was shopping with credit card receipts timestamped during the calls. I did not make those calls. Your client made them, using an AI version of my voice that he created specifically for the purpose of committing fraud. The prosecution's case concluded with Diana's testimony. She explained how she had first become suspicious of the voice recording project, how she had witnessed Vanessa and Derek entering my house when I wasn't home, how she had helped me discover the fraud and document everything. Diana's testimony was calm and factual, but her underlying anger at what had been done to me was evident. She described helping me set up the monitoring that caught the final fraudulent transaction in real time, providing the proof that I couldn't have made the authorization call, because I was literally standing in a grocery store with timestamp security footage. Diana also testified about her expertise in software engineering, and her knowledge of AI voice cloning technology, explaining to the jury in clear terms how sophisticated and deliberate the defendant's actions had been. This wasn't a case of someone accidentally stumbling into fraud, she said. This was carefully planned, technically complex, and executed with precision over many months. The defendants knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it anyway because they valued money more than they valued Mrs. Chen's trust, security, and well-being. The defense case was relatively brief. Both Vanessa and Derek chose not to testify, which Catherine had predicted. Their attorneys couldn't risk putting them on the stand where Catherine would have cross-examined them about the recordings and their own words. Instead, the defense called character witnesses who testified about what good people Vanessa and Derek had been before their financial problems, and expert witnesses who tried to minimize the seriousness of the crime by suggesting that family fraud was somehow less serious than fraud against strangers. But the prosecution's rebuttal witnesses demolished those arguments. Catherine called Dr. Helena Roberts, a psychologist specializing in elder abuse and family fraud. Dr. Roberts explained that crimes committed by family members are actually more damaging than crimes by strangers because they involve a fundamental betrayal of trust. When a stranger robs you, you feel violated, Dr. Roberts testified. When a family member robs you, especially an adult child robbing an elderly parent, you feel not only violated but also betrayed at the deepest level. You question your judgment, your relationships, your entire understanding of who you can trust. The psychological damage is profound and long-lasting. Dr. Roberts also testified about the specific cruelty of using AI technology to steal someone's voice and identity. The voice is intimately connected to identity and personhood, she explained. When someone steals your voice and uses it to harm you, they're not just stealing money. They're stealing your autonomy, your identity, your ability to trust that when you speak, it's actually you speaking. Mrs. Chen will likely struggle for years with questions about identity and authenticity, because her own voice was used as a weapon against her. The closing arguments took place on day 8 of the trial. Catherine Morales stood before the jury and methodically walked through every piece of evidence, every recording, every document that proved the defendant's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Members of the jury, she concluded, this case comes down to a simple question. Do we, as a society, accept that family members can rob their elderly relatives using sophisticated technology, and then claim that financial desperation somehow justifies that betrayal? The defendants want you to believe they were desperate people who made mistakes. But the evidence shows they were calculating criminals who planned every detail of their crime, who mocked their victim while stealing from her, and who showed no remorse until they were caught. Margaret Chen trusted her daughter. She welcomed her into her home. She recorded hours of her own voice as a gift to her grandchildren. And in return, Vanessa Chen Thornton and Derek Thornton betrayed that trust in the most calculating way imaginable. They stole not just money but identity, autonomy, and peace of mind. I ask you to hold them accountable by finding them guilty on all charges. Patricia Whitmore's closing argument for Vanessa emphasized desperation and Derek's influence. My client made terrible choices, she admitted. But those choices came from a place of fear and panic, not malice. She was terrified of losing her home and disappointing her children. She was influenced by a husband with technical skills she didn't understand. She deserves to be held accountable, but she also deserves your compassion as you consider the context of her actions. Richard Blackstone's closing for Derek tried one last time to minimize the crime and shift blame to me. The prosecution wants you to see this as a story of evil children victimizing a helpless mother, he said. But the reality is more nuanced. Margaret Chen had resources that could have helped her struggling family. Her choice not to help created the desperation that led to these regrettable events. Derek Thornton's methods were wrong, but his motivation was understandable. Judge Morrison's jury instructions were clear and comprehensive. She explained the law regarding fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy. She emphasized that financial desperation is not a legal defense for theft, and that family relationships don't diminish criminal liability. She told the jury that they must determine whether the prosecution had proven each element of each crime beyond a reasonable doubt, and that they must consider each defendant separately. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those 48 hours were the longest of my life. Diana stayed with me constantly, and Lauren took additional time off work to be there. We waited in a small conference room the prosecutor's office had set aside for us, trying to distract ourselves with books and conversation, but mostly just watching the clock and wondering what the jury was thinking. On the afternoon of the second day, we got word that the jury had reached a verdict. The walk back into the courtroom felt surreal, like moving through water. I took my seat between Diana and Lauren, and we held hands as the jury filed in. I tried to read their faces, but they were carefully neutral. Judge Morrison asked if the jury had reached a verdict, and the foreperson, a middle-aged man named Daniel, stood and confirmed they had. The clerk began reading the verdicts, and each one felt like validation of everything I had experienced. In the case of Vanessa Chen Thornton, on the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of identity theft in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of elder abuse in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. I heard a sob from somewhere behind me, probably from someone in Vanessa's extended family or friend group who had attended the trial. But I felt only a grim satisfaction. Justice was being served. The verdicts for Derek were identical. Guilty on all counts. Judge Morrison thanked the jury for their service and scheduled sentencing for 4 weeks later. As the courtroom cleared, I saw Vanessa crying at the defense table, her attorney trying to comfort her. Derek looked angry, his jaw clenched, glaring at the jury box as if their guilty verdict was a personal betrayal. Neither of them looked at me. Neither of them showed any indication that they understood what they had actually done to me, or felt any genuine remorse for the harm they had caused. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us asking for comments. Catherine made a brief statement about justice being served and the seriousness of elder abuse and technology-enabled fraud. Then she turned to me and asked if I wanted to say anything. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. I want other elderly people to know that if someone wants to preserve your voice or any other biometric data, please be cautious about who has access to that information and how it might be used. I trusted my daughter completely, and that trust was used as a weapon against me. Technology is wonderful, but it can also be misused in ways we're only beginning to understand. Please protect yourselves, ask questions, and don't assume that family members always have your best interests at heart. The sentencing hearing 4 weeks later was my opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. I had worked on it for days, trying to capture everything I needed to say without becoming so emotional that I couldn't finish. When Judge Morrison called on me, I walked to the podium and looked out at the courtroom. Vanessa and Derek were there in their orange jumpsuits, having been held without bail since the guilty verdict. My name is Margaret Chen, I began, and for 68 years I thought I understood how the world worked. I thought that if you were a good mother, if you loved your children and sacrificed for them and taught them right from wrong, they would grow up to be good people. I thought that family meant something, that blood created a bond that couldn't be broken by greed or selfishness. I was wrong about all of that. My voice grew stronger as I continued. Vanessa, you are my daughter. I carried you for 9 months. I held you when you were sick. I worked extra jobs to pay for your education. I celebrated your successes and comforted you through your failures. I would have done anything for you if you had simply asked. But instead of asking, you chose to betray me in the most calculated way possible. You spent months planning how to steal from me. You recorded my voice under false pretenses. You created a technological copy of me to use as a weapon. And then you used that weapon to rob me of my retirement security, my peace of mind, and my faith in family relationships. I paused, looking directly at Vanessa, who was crying but still wouldn't meet my eyes. The worst part isn't the money. Although that $127,000 represented decades of careful saving and sacrifice. The worst part is knowing that every kind word you spoke to me during those months was a lie. Every expression of concern was manipulation. Every family dinner and holiday celebration was just part of your performance to keep me trusting you, while you destroyed me financially. I looked at Derek. And you, Derek. I welcomed you into my family. I loved you as a son-in-law. I never suspected that you saw me as nothing more than a source of money, a target to be exploited with your technical skills. The contempt you showed for me in those recorded conversations, calling me simple, mocking my frugal lifestyle, laughing about how easy I was to fool, that contempt is something I will never forget. I turned back to address the entire courtroom. What Vanessa and Derek did to me isn't just about one family or one crime. It's about a future where technology can be used to steal not just our money but our very identity, our voice, our ability to trust that when we speak, it's actually us speaking. They pioneered a form of fraud that will likely become more common as AI technology becomes more accessible. They proved that family trust can be weaponized in new and terrifying ways. I hope that their conviction sends a message that this kind of crime will not be tolerated, that using technology to abuse elderly family members will be punished severely. I concluded my statement looking directly at Judge Morrison. Your Honor, I'm not a vindictive person, but I believe that Vanessa and Derek need to face consequences that reflect the seriousness of what they've done. They planned this crime for months. They executed it with precision. They showed no remorse until they were caught, and even now they seem more concerned about their own suffering than the harm they caused. I ask that you sentence them to the maximum allowed under the law, both to punish them appropriately and to deter others who might consider similar crimes. Judge Morrison nodded gravely and made notes on her legal pad. Then it was Vanessa's turn to speak before sentencing. Her attorney had clearly coached her, and she stood at the podium reading from a prepared statement, her voice shaking. I want to apologize to my mother for the pain I've caused, she began, but the words sounded rehearsed rather than genuine. I was in a desperate situation and I made terrible choices. I never intended to hurt her. I thought I could replace the money before she noticed, and I convinced myself that borrowing from family wasn't really stealing. I know now how wrong I was and I'm deeply sorry. But even this apology was carefully constructed to minimize her culpability. She called it borrowing, not stealing. She said she never intended to hurt me, ignoring all the recorded conversations where she and Derek had laughed about my suffering. She was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to present herself as misguided rather than malicious. Judge Morrison's expression suggested she wasn't buying it any more than I was. Derek's statement was even worse. He barely acknowledged me at all, focusing instead on how the conviction had ruined his life and destroyed his career. He talked about missing his children, about the hardship of being incarcerated, about how he wished he could turn back time and make different choices. But he never actually apologized for the specific things he had done or showed any understanding of why they were wrong. Judge Morrison let him finish, then fixed both defendants with a hard stare. I've been a judge for 23 years, she began, and I have seen many cases of fraud and theft. But this case stands out for the level of premeditation, the sophistication of the methods, and the profound betrayal of familial trust. You didn't steal from a stranger or a corporation. You stole from your own mother, someone who loved you and trusted you completely. And you did it using technology in a way that violated her identity and autonomy at the most fundamental level. She paused, letting her words sink in. Ms. Chen Thornton, you have been convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and fraud in the first degree. The prosecution has requested the maximum sentence, and I believe that request is justified. You showed no remorse during the commission of this crime. The recorded conversations reveal someone who was enjoying the fraud, who mocked the victim, who felt entitled to steal because of your own financial choices. I therefore sentence you to 15 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years served. Vanessa gasped and started crying harder, but Judge Morrison continued without pause. Mr. Thornton, you were the technical architect of this fraud. You researched the methods, created the AI voice model, made the fraudulent calls, and actively participated in planning to extend the crime even further. You showed similar lack of remorse and actively enjoyed victimizing Mrs. Chen. I therefore sentence you to 18 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 12 years served. Judge Morrison added additional conditions. Both defendants would be required to make full restitution of the stolen funds, though given their financial situation, that restitution would likely come from prison wages over many years. They would be prohibited from any contact with me unless I initiated it, which I had no intention of doing, and they would be required to participate in programs addressing fraud prevention and victim empathy while incarcerated. Court is adjourned, Judge Morrison concluded, and it was over. Vanessa and Derek were led away by corrections officers, both of them crying now, the reality of their sentences finally hitting them. I sat in the courtroom for a long time after everyone else had left, just Diana and Lauren sitting quietly beside me. It's really over, Lauren said softly. They're going to prison and you're safe now. But I knew it wasn't really over. The trial was finished, the criminals were convicted and sentenced, but the emotional aftermath would last much longer. I had to figure out how to rebuild my life, how to trust again, how to find meaning after such a profound betrayal. The following weeks were a blur of media attention and emotional processing. The case had attracted national coverage because of the novel use of AI technology in the fraud, and I was invited to speak at conferences and on news programs about the risks of voice cloning and elder abuse. I declined most of these invitations at first, still too raw to talk publicly about what had happened. But Diana encouraged me to consider using my experience to help others, and eventually I agreed to a few carefully selected appearances. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out sharing their own stories of family financial abuse, or expressing fear about similar technology being used against them or their elderly relatives. Many cybersecurity experts contacted me wanting to discuss how to better protect against AI-enabled fraud. Several legislators reached out about drafting new laws to address the emerging threat of voice cloning crimes. Diana and I started brainstorming about how to channel this energy into something constructive. What if we created an organization to help other victims of technology-enabled elder abuse? Diana suggested one evening as we sat in my living room. We could provide resources, connect victims with legal help, educate elderly people about protecting their digital identity, push for better laws and regulations. I thought about it for several days. The idea of taking my pain and turning it into purpose appealed to me, giving meaning to what I had endured. But I wasn't sure I had the energy or expertise to run such an organization. I'm a retired music teacher, I told Diana. I don't know anything about running a nonprofit or advocating for policy changes. But you know what it feels like to be a victim, Diana countered. And I have technical expertise and project management skills. Together we could create something real. We could help people. We could maybe prevent some future Margarets from going through what you experienced. So we did it. 3 months after the sentencing, Diana and I officially launched the Voice Guardian Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting elderly people from technology-enabled financial fraud. We started small, just the two of us working out of my living room, but the response was immediate and powerful. Within weeks, we had connected with dozens of victims, cybersecurity experts, attorneys specializing in elder law, and technology companies interested in developing better safeguards. Our first major project was creating educational materials explaining voice cloning, deepfakes, and other AI technologies that could be used for fraud. We developed presentations for senior centers, retirement communities, and advocacy organizations. Diana handled the technical explanations while I shared my personal story, and together we helped thousands of elderly people understand the risks and how to protect themselves. We also started advocating for legislative changes. Existing laws hadn't been written with AI voice cloning in mind, and we pushed for new statutes specifically addressing this technology. Within 2 years, we had helped pass laws in 12 states requiring specific consent for voice cloning, creating enhanced penalties for using AI in elder fraud, and mandating better verification systems for financial institutions. The foundation grew beyond anything I had imagined. We hired staff, opened a proper office, and expanded our services to include direct assistance to victims. We connected people with attorneys, helped them navigate law enforcement reports, provided emotional support through the investigation and trial process. Diana served as executive director while I focused on advocacy and education, using my story to raise awareness and funds. Lauren became actively involved as well, bringing her nursing background to help us develop materials about protecting elderly patients from financial exploitation in healthcare settings. The foundation also facilitated my healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Meeting other victims, hearing their stories, helping them find justice and recovery, these experiences helped me process my own trauma. I wasn't alone in what I had experienced. Family financial abuse was distressingly common, and the victims needed not just legal recourse but also emotional support and validation that what happened to them wasn't their fault. Through the foundation, I met women and men who had been robbed by their children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, even spouses. Each story was heartbreaking, but each person's courage in coming forward and seeking justice was inspiring. One case particularly touched me. An 82-year-old man named Robert had been defrauded by his grandson using a similar AI voice cloning scheme. The grandson had recorded Robert's voice during family dinners, claiming he was creating a family oral history project, then used the recordings to authorize withdrawals from Robert's retirement accounts. Robert felt intense shame about being victimized by family and had delayed reporting the crime. When he finally contacted the foundation, he was on the verge of losing his home. Diana and I worked with him for months, connecting him with an attorney who took his case pro bono, helping him document the fraud, supporting him through the investigation and trial. His grandson was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. At the sentencing hearing, Robert delivered a victim impact statement that echoed much of what I had said at Vanessa's sentencing. "I thought family meant loyalty and love," Robert said, his voice shaking but determined. "Instead, I learned that family can mean betrayal and exploitation. But I also learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand beside you when you're vulnerable. Margaret and Diana became family to me when my biological family tried to destroy me." Hearing him say that brought tears to my eyes because he had articulated exactly what I had learned through this experience. As the years passed, I found my own sense of peace and purpose. The foundation thrived, helping hundreds of victims and influencing policy across the country. I continued teaching piano, finding joy in my students' progress and the simple pleasure of making music. My relationship with Lauren grew deeper as we worked together on the foundation, and as she supported me through the ongoing process of healing from Vanessa's betrayal. My grandchildren through Lauren brought light to my life, and I cherish my time with them, grateful for family relationships built on genuine love rather than manipulation. Diana became truly family to me, not just a friend or colleague, but someone I trusted completely and loved deeply. She moved permanently into my guest house, and we fell into a comfortable routine of shared meals, collaborative work on the foundation, and quiet evenings spent reading or listening to music. She had saved my life that day when she whispered her warning, and she continued to save it in smaller ways every day by being present, supportive, and genuinely caring. 5 years after the trial, I received a letter from Vanessa. It had been forwarded through my attorney since she wasn't allowed direct contact. In the letter, she claimed to have spent her years in prison reflecting on what she had done and understanding now how deeply she had betrayed me. She wrote about therapy programs she had participated in, about finally accepting full responsibility for her choices, about wanting to apologize properly if I would ever be willing to hear her. I sat with that letter for weeks, unsure how to respond or even if I should respond. Part of me wanted to believe she had genuinely changed, that the daughter I had loved still existed somewhere inside the person who had committed those crimes. But a larger part of me knew that regardless of whether Vanessa's remorse was genuine, I didn't owe her forgiveness or reconciliation. She had made her choices and I had made mine. Finally, I wrote back a short response. "Vanessa, I acknowledge your letter and your stated remorse. I'm glad you're taking responsibility for your actions. However, I'm not ready for direct contact or reconciliation, and I may never be ready. What you did to me was a fundamental violation of trust that can't be repaired by apologies or time served. I've built a new life without you in it, and that life is good and meaningful. I wish you well in your rehabilitation, but I need you to respect my boundaries and not contact me again unless I reach out to you first." I never heard from her again, and I was grateful for that respect of my boundaries. Derek never reached out, which didn't surprise me. According to Diana's occasional research into their status, he had been a difficult inmate, frequently in trouble for various infractions, not taking advantage of rehabilitation programs. He seemed to still believe he had been wrongly convicted, that his actions had been justified by financial desperation. Some people never change, never develop the capacity for genuine remorse or self-reflection. Derek appeared to be one of them. As I approached my 8th year post-trial, I found myself reflecting on how completely my life had changed. At 76, I was more active and engaged than I had been at 68. The foundation had become a nationally recognized organization, and I traveled regularly giving speeches, conducting training sessions, consulting with legislators and technology companies about AI safety and elder protection. I had been featured in documentaries about financial fraud, interviewed for articles about family betrayal, and recognized by several organizations for my advocacy work. But more importantly, I had found genuine peace. The anger and hurt that consumed me immediately after discovering Vanessa's betrayal had gradually transformed into something more like sad acceptance. I had been victimized, yes, but I had also survived, thrived, and found purpose. I had learned that family is something you build through choice and mutual respect rather than something automatically conferred by biology. I had discovered that trust, once broken, doesn't need to be restored with the person who broke it. You can learn to trust again with new people who prove themselves worthy of that trust. One morning, as Diana and I sat on my porch drinking coffee and watching the sunrise, she asked me a question that made me think. If you could go back and prevent all of this from happening, would you? If you could stop Vanessa from ever planning the fraud, would you choose that? I thought about it for a long time before answering. That's such a complicated question. Part of me obviously wishes I had never experienced that betrayal and loss. I wish I still had a relationship with my daughter and my grandchildren through her. I wish I hadn't lost that money or felt that violation. But I also think about everything that came from that experience. The foundation, the hundreds of people we've helped, the laws we've influenced, the friendships I've built, including the depth of my relationship with you. If I prevented the fraud, none of that would exist. So no, I finally said. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't choose this path if I had known what was coming. But now that I've walked it, I can see that it led somewhere meaningful. Vanessa tried to destroy me, but instead she inadvertently gave me a purpose and a mission that has enriched my life in ways I never expected. Diana reached over and squeezed my hand. You're remarkable, Margaret. You took something that could have destroyed you and transformed it into something that helps others. That's genuine strength. As I sat there watching the sunrise, I realized that this was the moment I had been working toward for 8 years. This was the moment of true peace, where I could look back at my experience without being consumed by anger or grief. Where I could see Vanessa not as a monster, but as a deeply flawed person who made terrible choices and would live with those consequences. Where I could recognize my own resilience and growth. The Voice Guardian Foundation continues its work, and I continue mine. I still teach piano to students who bring me joy every week. I still garden and find peace in watching things grow. I still have coffee every morning with Diana, now the most important relationship in my life. And I continue to speak publicly about my experience, not because I enjoy reliving the betrayal, but because every time I share my story, someone in the audience comes up afterward and tells me that I've helped them understand their own situation, or given them courage to report a crime, or simply validated their experience of family betrayal. 8 years ago, Vanessa and Derek tried to steal my voice and use it against me. Instead, they gave me a voice that reaches farther than it ever did before. A voice that speaks for victims of elder abuse and technology-enabled fraud. A voice that advocates for protection and justice. They tried to silence me by stealing my identity. Instead, they helped me find my truest identity as an advocate, survivor, and guardian for others who face similar violations. As I finish writing this, sitting in my home office surrounded by the photos and mementos of the life I've built post-betrayal, I think about the title that brought me to share this story. They wanted to preserve Grandma's voice. They did, just not in the way they intended. My voice is preserved not in an AI model used for fraud, but in the foundation that bears witness to what was done to me, in the laws that now protect others, in the speeches I give and the victims I help. My voice matters more now than it ever did before, and no one can steal it from me again. I am Margaret Chen. I am a survivor. I am an advocate. I am a teacher, a friend, a mentor. I am someone who learned that the worst betrayal can lead to the most meaningful purpose. And I am here to tell anyone who will listen that technology can be used as a weapon, but courage and purpose can transform that weapon into a shield that protects others from similar harm. That is the gift that came from the curse. That is the meaning I found in the betrayal. And that is why, when people ask if I've forgiven Vanessa, I can honestly say that I've moved beyond needing to forgive or not forgive. I've simply moved forward into a life that doesn't require her presence or absence to be complete. I am whole on my own terms, surrounded by chosen family who prove every day that love is about actions rather than words, about loyalty rather than biology, about standing beside someone when they're vulnerable rather than exploiting that vulnerability for personal gain. This is my story. This is my voice. And no one can ever take it from me again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.